a wet morning in the woods of western Pennsylvania, a very small fight helped open a very large war. The clash at Jumonville Glen on May 28, 1754, lasted only minutes. The numbers were tiny compared with the armies that would later fight across Europe, India, the Caribbean, West Africa, and North America. But the skirmish carried a dangerous question: who had the right to command the Ohio country, and whose version of a violent encounter would the world believe? The Ohio country was not an empty frontier waiting for European maps. It was a homeland and diplomatic arena for native nations, including peoples connected to the Haudenosaunee, Lenape, Shawnee, Mingo, and others, whose alliances and rivalries shaped every European move. British colonies on the Atlantic coast wanted western land, trade, and routes into the interior. French officials in Canada and Louisiana wanted a chain of forts and waterways linking the St. Lawrence, the Great Lakes, the Ohio, and the Mississippi. The point of pressure was not just wilderness. It was commerce, diplomacy, sovereignty, and empire. By the early 1750s, both France and Britain claimed influence in the Ohio Valley. French forces built and occupied posts to secure the route. Virginians, including investors tied to the Ohio Company, pressed their own claims. In 1753, the young George Washington carried a message from Virginia Governor Robert Dinwiddie warning the French to leave. The French refused. That diplomatic mission made Washington visible, but it did not solve the central problem. Each side believed delay would strengthen the other. In 1754, Washington returned to the region as a lieutenant colonel in Virginia's provincial forces. He was only 22 years old. His orders were to help assert Virginia's claim and to support a fort at the forks of the Ohio, where the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers meet to form the Ohio River. But French troops moved first. They took the unfinished British position and built Fort Duquesne. Washington's small command was left in a dangerous middle ground, too weak to challenge the fort directly, but too committed to withdraw without losing face and influence. Washington camped at a place later called the Great Meadows. Around him were forests, ridges, wet paths, and uncertain intelligence. His most important native ally was Tanacharison, often called the Half-King by British sources, a Seneca leader whose own goals were not identical with Virginia's. Tanacharison opposed French power in the region and wanted British support, but he was also navigating native politics in which European promises were tools, risks, and sometimes traps. The coming encounter cannot be understood as a simple British-French duel. Native strategy was central. French detachment Washington encountered was led by Joseph Coulon de Jumonville. French accounts describe Jumonville as carrying a summons or diplomatic warning. British and Virginian accounts treated the party as a military threat scouting near Washington's position. That dispute mattered because 18th-century European warfare placed great importance on whether a party was acting as an envoy, a spy, or a combatant. If Jumonville was an emissary, killing him could be framed as murder. If he was a hidden enemy force, Washington could claim defensive action. During the night of May 27th into the 28th, Washington and a small party moved through rain and dark woods with Tanacharison and native warriors. They approached a narrow, rocky hollow where the French party was camped. The place later known as Jumonville Glen is not a broad battlefield. It is a constricted woodland pocket, the kind of terrain where visibility is broken by trees, rocks, slopes, wet leaves, and sudden movement. In such a place, fear and misinterpretation could do as much work as deliberate planning. At dawn, Washington's men surrounded or approached the French camp. Shots were fired. The fight was brief, perhaps about 15 minutes. Jumonville and several French soldiers were killed, others were captured, at least one escaped to carry word back. The exact opening moment is contested. Who fired first? Did the French reach for weapons? Was there a warning? Surviving accounts disagree, and later propaganda sharpened every ambiguity. What is clear is that Washington had crossed a threshold from warning and maneuver into bloodshed. Then came the most controversial moment. Some accounts say that after the firing stopped, Tanacharison killed the wounded Jumonville with a tomahawk, possibly declaring that the French had no authority there. The details are debated, but the political meaning was explosive. For Tanacharison, the act may have been a statement within native diplomacy and regional power struggles. For the French, it became evidence that their officer had been assassinated while on a mission. For Washington, it became a crisis he could not easily control or explain. Washington wrote that he had surprised a party that intended hostile action. French officials answered with outrage, insisting that Jumonville had been carrying a diplomatic summons. The same event now had competing stories, one of a justified strike against a lurking enemy, another of an ambush and killing of an envoy. In an imperial contest, narrative was a weapon. Reports traveled faster than armies could be fully assembled, and each government used the story to harden opinion and justify escalation. After the skirmish, Washington knew retaliation was likely. He withdrew to the Great Meadows and ordered defenses improved. The result was Fort Necessity, a circular stockade in an exposed meadow surrounded by higher ground and woods. The name tells the story. It was a fort built because Washington needed somewhere to stand, but it was poorly placed for defense against a serious attack. Rain turned trenches and fields into mud. Supplies were limited. Many soldiers were inexperienced. The forest that had hidden Washington's dawn approach could now hide French and native attackers. On July 3, 1754, a larger French and native force led by Jumonville's brother, Louis Coulon de Jumonville, attacked Fort Necessity. Washington's men fought in rain and confusion before accepting surrender terms. The document included French wording that Washington later said he did not fully understand. It used a term implying the assassination of Jumonville. Whether through translation, exhaustion, or pressure, Washington had signed a paper that the French could use as political proof. He was allowed to withdraw, but the damage to British prestige and imperial peace was done. The Jumonville affair and Fort Necessity did not by themselves create the global 7 Years' War, but they became early sparks in the chain. Britain and France sent more troops. In 1755, General Edward Braddock's expedition against Fort Duquesne ended in disaster, with Washington present as an aide. War widened across North America and then across oceans. By 1756, Britain and France were formally at war. What began in contested woods became part of a worldwide struggle over colonies, trade routes, naval power, and continental alliances. For native nations, the conflict was not simply a side theater of European rivalry. Alliances were practical and contested. Communities weighed which empire threatened them more, which trading partner was useful, which promises were credible, and how to preserve land and autonomy in a dangerous world. The war's eventual British victory removed French power from Canada, but it did not bring peace to native peoples. Instead, British expansion and post-war policy helped provoke new resistance, including Pontiac's War, and reshape the politics that eventually led to the American Revolution. For George Washington, Jumonville Glen was an early lesson in command, terrain, translation, and political consequence. He had sought to defend Virginia's claims and protect his force. Instead, he became a named figure in an international controversy. Later generations often remember Washington as the disciplined commander of the Revolution and the first president. But at 22 in these woods, he was inexperienced, ambitious, brave, and fallible. His actions became part of a chain he could not control. The Glen matters because it compresses imperial history into one small place. A few dozen men in wet woods carried the claims of governors, traders, native diplomats, French officers, British investors, and distant monarchs. The fight shows how empires often expand through unclear orders and local decisions, not only through grand declarations. It also warns us that history's turning points are not always obvious when they happen. At Jumonville Glen, the world did not yet know it was watching a fuse being lit. Today, the site invites a different kind of attention. It asks us to look past the myth of a clean frontier and see a layered borderland of native sovereignty, European rivalry, fragile alliances, and contested memory. It asks us to treat the sources carefully, because every surviving account had a purpose. And it asks us to remember that a skirmish of minutes can matter for centuries when it changes the stories nations tell about honor, fear, land, and war.